Hello and welcome to World Insight on CCTV News. I'm Zhou in Beijing. Coming up on today's program, new talks aim at ending the fighting in Syria. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry and Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov meet in the hopes of working out a new ceasefire. Can new negotiations help bring an end to the bloodshed in Syria that has claimed hundreds of thousands of lives? And big data, it's all around us. The amount of information generated every day on everyone is enormous. With so much data about everybody, can that information be misused? CCTV News anchor Tian Wei sat down with Paul Deal, a big data specialist from Carnegie Mellon University, to get his take on the issue. Well, we start today's show with the latest Syria peace talks. Last Friday, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry met his Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov in Geneva to talk about a ceasefire in Syria. Talks between the two top diplomats lasted almost 12 hours throughout the day. And afterwards, they announced they were very close to the final stages of coming to an agreement. But with no deals officially reached, peace talks will continue in the future.
No deal on a ceasefire, just closer to it.
We have completed the vast majority of those technical discussions.
Previously, the two had just met last month in Moscow, and Lavrov reaffirmed their consensus on Syria.
We're not talking about how to stop the air forces, but how to make the airstrikes more efficient, so that we can better fight the extremist groups and terrorism. It is the consensus that we have reached in Moscow.
There are two main priorities for Kerry: responding to ceasefire violations by the Damascus administration and checking the rising influence of the former al-Nusra Front, a Syria-based extremist group. Moscow and Washington support opposite sides in the Syrian conflict, which erupted in 2011.
What are we going
Russia backs Syria's President Bashar al-Assad, while the U.S. supports Syria's main opposition alliance and some rebels that Washington calls moderates. However, several successive rounds of negotiations, either between the global big powers or the Syrian parties, have failed to end the conflict.
The level of despair has reached unprecedented levels, perhaps anywhere in the world. And we need to really have not a pause, but peace. This is different. This is a longer term.
But even the 48-hour pause urged by the UN could not be achieved. 4 towns have now been 116 days without any convoy bringing food or other supplies. On Friday, the UN described the lack of humanitarian access to Syria's besieged areas as wholly unacceptable, with just one aid convoy having completed deliveries this month. In the coming weeks, experts from the two countries, the U.S. and Russia, will continue the meetings in Geneva. The past 5 years have seen more than 290,000 people killed and millions forced to leave their homes. Many Syrians wonder if more meetings will make the 6th year a peaceful one.
For more on the Syrian crisis, we're joined in our Beijing studio by Ms. He Wenping from the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. And in Moscow, we have Vyacheslav Matuzov, who is an independent political analyst and former Russian diplomat, and joining us in Washington, D.C., P.J. Crowley, former U.S. Assistant Secretary of State. Welcome to our program, all of you. Let me start with you, Ms. He. The shocking images coming from Aleppo reminds us there is still very brutal war going on in Syria. Over 500,000 people have been killed and even millions have become refugees. Do you think the timing of Russians and Americans sitting together and having negotiations will bring an end to the hostilities in Syria this time?
Well, I'm not so optimistic at all, because similar the talk like this, I think, has been taken place before. So this is not the first time. Of course, this is not the last time. So I think only by this single talk itself, I don't think it will totally bring the end of this civil war. Even the Russian foreign minister and also the John Kerry, both those leading negotiators themselves, they hasn't given such very optimistic tone either. They are saying even the comprehensive treaty itself now cannot be announced yet. So there still leave a lot of technical issue will be left for those expertise to have further negotiate or discuss. They are just saying some progress has been made. So even themselves haven't given us.
So are Russians and Americans serious about negotiations this time? Mr. Matuzov, your take first.
Well, I think that twice Kerry and Lavrov were in marathon, 13 hours, 12 hours. They were talking, but they no issued any common point, common ground, common declaration. I think that means that Russia and the United States has a principal differences in approach to way how to solve Syrian crisis. I think that America till now is supporting idea that Bashar Assad is illegal, that he should go out, and changing regime by those who are representing, on their view, opposition forces that will only have legal status. I think that it is position is not right, at least, and till America doesn't regard of these principles of her approach, I don't think that any real progress will be achieved in negotiations on the level of two countries, the United States and Russia.
Mr. Crowley, why this time around Americans and Russians have more reasons to come to any kind of agreement?
I think what they were talking about on Friday was not a comprehensive solution, as all of my colleagues have said. You know, there's still this fundamental divide between the United States, Russia, and other parties to the conflict over the future of the Assad regime. You know, the dilemma for the United States is that there's no formula presently to end the conflict. The dilemma for Russia is that there's no path forward for the Assad regime to resume, you know, its control of Syria that it had, say, 5 years ago. But I do think that there's value in discussions about, you know, interim steps. Can you achieve a ceasefire in large sections of Syria so that you can deliver humanitarian assistance to those, you know, who need it? Can you reach an understanding as to attacking the Islamic State, defeating the caliphate there, and at the same time, you know, reducing the leverage that a powerful group like the al-Nusra Front poses, and the challenge it poses to the future of the country. So I think there's the potential for some sort of interim constructive steps, but as I think the three of us all agree, you know, the United States and Russia, as two parties of a multi-sided conflict, still do not have an agreement fundamentally on the future of Syria and how it should be governed.
And you just mentioned there are still fundamental differences between Russians and Americans. For example, they have different definitions of what is terrorist groups. How can they overcome those difficulties and put those forces that they think they are in control to stop hostilities at this particular time? Mr. Crowley?
I think we have to be very cautious here, because you know, you can easily identify, you know, 10 sides, you know, to this conflict. You know, Russia has an interest, the United States has an interest, but you have a wide variety of actors inside Syria, all of whom define, you know, this conflict differently and define potential solutions differently. As we've seen emerge in recent days, you have a conflict between the dynamic inside of Syria, for example, with Kurdish interests in having an autonomous region as the Iraqi Kurds do next door. And you have an indication that that kind of, increase in the leverage that the Kurds have within Syria is of great concern to Turkey. And as we sit here, it appears that Turkish and Kurdish forces are now in conflict, within Syria. So I think you have a significant interest by Russia and the United States, but we have to be realistic that there's a limit to what these two countries by themselves can achieve.
We'll talk about Turkey later on. Mr. Matuzov, what do you think is the biggest challenges for Russia to really have a substantial agreement? Do you think Bashar's government will stop at launching attacks on the rebel forces?
Russia doesn't care about the future of Bashar Assad of Syrian regime because Russian position is absolutely clear from the very beginning of the Syrian crisis that all future of Syrian people should decided by Syrian population, Syrian people. And the question is how to arrange them, this opportunity. But not, we reject absolutely clear any efforts to change regime, change presidents from outside. Any orders for Bashar Assad to go out and the regime has fallen is unacceptable principally. I think that now on this stage it's very important to stop fighting. Stop fighting, Russia suggested many times and it demanded from all sides.
Why do you think this fighting hasn't stopped yet? Because there are several rounds of negotiations already, but it seems that fighting is still going on the ground in Syria.
Because all groups, militarized groups in Syria who are supported by the United States, not all of them, but mainly these groups are rejecting ceasefire and demanding prolonging fight against Syrian regime. And they don't consider that final future for Syria without Bashar Assad should be decided right now. And in this connection, I can say that American behavior in Syria is not right, because they sent their troops, their specialists, their experts to Kurdish region that was considered as an ally of Syrian regime. After arrival of American experts, all these Kurdish groups, militarized groups, were open fighting against Syrian regime. Why? Because they want to change this regime by military ways. I think that should be absolutely clear for all there is no military solution in Syria. And for this basic point should regard and they take any position. Now we confront Turkish forces with Kurdish forces supported by the United States. Where is the policy of the United States in this case? I think it is strategical question to find solution, peace or war. If it is war, against whom? Groups that is considered terroristic on the military. I think that it is question now under discussion.
We hope there are a lot of
America, Kerry and Lavrov will find as soon as possible common ground.
Which are the terror groups and what kind of a political future for Syria? Do they have strong incentives, Americans and Russians, Bashar and the opposition, to sit down and really have serious talks?
Well, I think nowadays the situation on the ground is more complicated than before. There are not only two major players, that is Russia and the United States. Now there are many regional players now all jumped in this game. For
example, Turkey.
Like Turkey, last week they sent the troops all the way inside of the Syria territory. And also Iran has been offered the military base for the Russia. their airplane to use. So that's also very first time, even before the Islamic Revolution. And then at that time, the Iran pro-U.S. government hasn't offered this military base for United States to use. So this is a very key thing. I think that's one of the driving force for the United States now eager to have a settlement about Syria crisis with Russia. So I think among all of that, one key fundamental reason for these conflicts becoming prolonged so many years, that is, they cannot reach a consensus about who is the terrorist group, who is the moderate, those opposition forces. So those two, like extremist forces, rebel forces, and moderate, those opposition forces, they are intermingling with each other. They are also, take the activity based same area. So
what do you think can change their minds about forgetting definitions of terrorist groups, focusing on having a ceasefire and have a political negotiation?
Well, it's quite hard. If you really take like Syria people's interests as the priority, and then you drop all your own national interests just behind, maybe that's the time you can reach some real consensus. But now those ceasefire, when they have been shunned, there is a loophole there. They are saying, all right, all those like two parties, government forces and the rebel forces, it should be ceasefire, but except those air strikes towards those terrorist groups. That's exception from those ceasefire. So the Russian supported airstrikes together with Syria governments, those military attack, they're also saying in the name of anti-terror. And then they have targeted, sometimes by wrong targeting or by any other reasons for some bases, even supported by U.S. and by European those countries. And then that's why now the two leading players, they're talking about share the intelligence information. At least you are not targeting the bases I supported. So nowadays, all those
So do you think the Russians and Americans can this time really share intelligence and on the same page about what targets they should aim at?
But those shared intelligence only relevant with those intelligence matters with their own interests, so not for others.
Let's talk about Turkey's role in this. Turkey recently launched an offensive into Syria, fighting ISIL and also Kurds forces within Syria. What is Americans' stance on this, Mr. Crowley? It seems both the Kurds forces in Syria and the Turkey are both American allies, or should I say proxies.
Well, the United States and Turkey are allies as part of NATO. And the United States has been supporting, among other groups, the Kurdish forces in Syria that have focused their attention on taking back territory from the Islamic State, and in fact they have been, very effective recently in doing that. At the same time as we've seen the liberation of some villages in Syria, Manbij and others. There is concern by the United States as well over the positioning of these forces. The United States is very concerned about this clash that seems to be emerging between Turkish forces and Kurdish forces, and has openly encouraged both sides to try to stabilize situation and focus their energy on the Islamic State, not on each other. But this is part of the inherent complexity, within Turkey. I agree with my colleagues that the future of Syria should be up to the Syrian people. Now, the problem is that various communities, whether Sunnis, Shia, so-called moderates, the more extreme forces, they all have a zero-sum calculation on the future of the country. And I agree with Mr. Matisoff that, we need a political solution, but the reality is that the dynamic on the ground in Syria probably does not yet promote the kind of, political negotiation that everyone desires. But ultimately, the conflict is not going to end until the combatants have confidence that a process will lead to a genuine change in how Syria is governed.
Have Americans lived up to their commitments of stop aiding Kurdish forces if they do not pull out of the west of Euphrates, as you promised? That's the complaints from Turkey.
Well, we'll see. On the one hand, there is indications that the military forces have pulled back across to the east of the Euphrates. At the same time, there are allies of the Kurds who remain. I think from the United States standpoint, what you really need here is, as you take back territory from the Islamic State, it has to be effectively held. And that's the question. Is ultimately, as you're able to defeat the Islamic State, what forces are going to move in to fill that vacuum? That is obviously a major part of the discussion that's ongoing, between Russia and the United States and others over how to do that.
And Mr. Matsov, do you think Turkey's recent military operation into Syria has anything to do with the rapprochement between Ankara and Moscow?
We don't know any official position on this ground except declaration of Russian and Syrian foreign ministers, because they are not supporting military intervention from Turkey to Syria. But I draw your attention to the common ground for Turkey, Syria, Iraq and Iran in this connection, because all four countries in this area are against independent Kurdish state. And we consider that Kurdish ally of Syrian government that now are under ego of American military forces, that means party of Kurdish Union, is trying to spread their influence on Manbij, on Jerusalem, and then to the Mediterranean. And by this step, by this project, they are in intention, and obviously, it is intention to proclaim independent state. If so, Russia and the United States should take a common ground, common position on this prospect.
All right.
If they support aspirations of Kurdish people or not in this connection. Russia consider it is not the right, and from this position, Russia's not approved Turkish move, but not against it openly. And Syrian government also opposing any establishing Kurdish government on their territory. Kurdish groups, military groups, failed to conquer and to fight Syrian army.
Mr. Matuzov,
and in spite of the fact that they captured
this round of ceasefire negotiations
a city was controlled by Syrian army.
And do you think
under the pressure of Kurdish
military operations will last long?
Has right to withdraw.
Wind up very soon.
Well, this ceasefire has been on and off for many times. So I don't think this new round of talk between Russia and the U.S. now can endure a very long ceasefire. You know, those military attacking happened almost every day on the ground in Syria. Now, even with this complicated situation, I mean, more regional players now jumping into the game. So even the U.S. and Russia now, they cannot fully control all of those players. Even those regional players, I mean, in the government level, all those big or small, those rebel forces, some are even declare their emergence just with a new group. So they have been, you know, many. So they're out of the control. So even you have reached some truce in the office, like in Geneva, and then those, you know, those orders cannot be implemented to the frontier
so
in
enforcement
Syria.
is a problem. You are not optimistic at all.
Yeah, I'm not.
What about Turkish military operation? Will they last?
Turkish military action is a very interesting thing. I think they follow that tango. You know, the wave, like with if the closer with the Russia or closer with the U.S. So when they trying to keep some distance, like with U.S., maybe they will do something to plead the Russia. Okay. So when they want to keep distance with Russia, maybe to do something to plead the U.S.
It is a very hard
play the game
balancing
right
act.
now. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Ms. He. Thank you, Mr. Matuzov and Mr. Crowley, for your analysis on this. Thank you.
Thank you.
And you're now watching our program of World Insight here on CCTV News, and there is much more coming up on this program. We'll get our final segment coming. The amount of information generated every day on everyone is enormous, and experts say proper use of big data can help improve our lives. But what happens to privacy? And should cybersecurity be a real concern? My colleague Tian Wei sat down with Paul DeLeo, a big data specialist from Carnegie Mellon University, and we'll get his take on this. Welcome back. We're living in a world full of enormous amounts of information. Big data helps us to make sense of it. Back in 2012, the New York Times said that the era of big data had arrived. It has reached every corner of our daily lives. But this can make things more convenient for us. It also puts personal privacy under threat.
Data, a powerful resource in the modern world. When data is generated in huge amounts, which goes beyond the traditional capability of most data processing applications, we need big data, the ability to manage enormous amounts of information. It can capture, manage, process, and transfer data into understandable forms within a reasonable amount of time. Big data is applied to various fields now: data analysis for government policy making. It can help improve health care through clinical risk intervention and preventative analysis. It can also allow user behavior analysis for business or improving training and analysis of players even in sports. People go hand in hand with big data in their daily lives. From taking a taxi to ordering meals, shopping online, using social media, or recording every step you take. However, there are concerns about this intimate relationship between big data and people's daily lives. Big data touches so much personal, corporate, and national information, sometimes even beyond the data owner's awareness. All this information can be under threat and may be vulnerable to cyber attacks and other online security risks. Whether we like it or not now, people around the world are caught up in the net of big data.
And my colleague Tian Wei talked about the use of big data with Paul DeLeo during the Davos World Economic Forum held this summer in the city of Tianjin. Well, DeLeo is a scientist in the Robotics Institute of Carnegie Mellon University. He has been working on GigaPan, the newest development of global connection projects. He believes everyone should have access to big data collected by government institutions and corporations. And he says the entire society would benefit from that.
We've got a lot of big data in the world today, but how to make sure people will be able to understand this big data? You got some special weapons for us, or special skills.
Yes, so it's important to remember the old model of looking at data with spreadsheets or just in terms of data and numbers. It's not it doesn't make sense for various data sets. So for example, with Earth time lapse that we're looking at satellite imagery over the course of three decades. And so this is visual data that you need to show in a way that people can understand. And the way we approach that is to present it as a video. So you're looking at a region of the planet over time, and people understand a video plays frame by frame and shows the changes that way. And so we've seen that as a very easy way for people to understand basically time-lapse data and data over time. And we also use the model of Google Maps in the terms of how you zoom in and out and look at, basically going from the macro level to the more detailed level. So you can zoom in to see, the world as a whole, and then zoom in to localities and see that change over time.
Your job is to translate the big data into graphics. Absolutely. So how would that work? When you have a huge amount of big data right in front of you, where would you begin with?
Well, you need to start with basically aggregating the data in a way that makes sense. So for example, when we look at lights over time, so basically the growth of cities, the growth of regions, you can't show every point for every day of that. So you can show it basically at a yearly level, at a monthly level, and you can then even further fine-grain that by color coding it. And we've noticed that was very useful for when we showed lights at night. So we have a color scale from red to blue to show the change of light usage. And basically, in that case, it's very visually quick. People can look, see the red, and understand that this is the region that changed the fastest.
All right. And besides the big data that you are talking about, what are some of the other examples that could really help us to understand better about our world?
One data set that we're working with recently is on migration of refugees.
In Europe?
Well, from to Europe from various regions. And even just general sense of how people move from where they work to where they live. And in terms of those data sets, we use a similar model of data flow. And then by that I mean you'll start in a point, and then you'll physically show the path that they take. And you can't, of course, show every person, because that could be millions of lines, and that would just be overwhelming to look at. And so again, we use brightness of color. So you would see, the brighter of the white as it extends outward is the more concentration of that path that people are taking.
But how would you take hold of this data?
So getting hold of the data can be difficult. We've been lucky with our data sets that we've worked so far. It's been public domain, satellite imagery that we have access to. But we've worked with data sets, specifically in the United States, on drilling permits just to see where drilling is happening. And the difficulties there is that each state in the United States has different ways of storing the data, has different ways of us accessing the data, and it's quite convoluted. And to some extent, they don't really want people to have access to it because it can show maybe not pleasant things to the local communities. And we see similar things in Europe as well, where it's just every country has just different ways of accessing, and it's our lab itself is all about public access to data, and we love to have that, but it's not, the whole world doesn't see it that way.
But what can you do about this so far?
Well, I mean, what we've done is we've just, networked to try to find the right people that have this data. And, when you show them the data sets that we currently have and tell them that, this is the impact that could be made from it, then they realize that there is no point to sit on this data. Maybe we should give it, to the public for the greater good to some extent.
One of the things people are worried about is this divide of information that we're having in the new age of technology, whether people have access to big data, whether they have access to the analysis of the big data. So what do you make of the current situation? Is it fair, the system?
Yeah, well, like you said, I don't think it's particularly fair across the world in terms of access to the data. I mean, not only of the researchers getting access, but the public itself viewing the data. I mean, there's certainly there's countries where you can't access certain things, and like I said, as our lab itself, we think anyone should have access to it, and because it's up to the public to see these type of changes in the data and to better understand the world around them. You can't be blind to what's going on. I think everyone should have access to that.
But on the other hand, there's also the issue of privacy. The issue of privacy regarding the big data, because we have mobile phone with us. The smartphones usually collect a lot of the data, which we were not even aware of, and
Absolutely.
Be able to be used by others, which we would not even be aware of anyway also. So what do you think about the current stage? Is it the legal framework should catch up with the reality, or the public should be more aware of the rights they're having, or the government actually should be standing up more for the public rather than just getting hold of the big data themselves?
Well, that's very good points there, actually. I mean, personally, I think the public itself should be more aware of how they're using technology and the data being shared. I mean, you have people posting with Facebook, just everything, and Facebook itself collects the data. Google collects data as well. Be aware of with transportation, they keep track of GPS, right, for traffic to see how that expands outwards. And so I think people should be aware of that. That they're basically have become data themselves to these companies. I don't necessarily think the government should come in and regulate such things, but I think that corporations should use the data more wisely in terms of what they're collecting. And
at this moment, we've got a lot of new technologies all going on at the same time. But the question is, when they're being put together in one form or another, how our world is likely to be changed.
Well, I mean, I'm pretty excited about it. I mean, certainly artificial intelligence, you see the expansion of that, being applied to, the medical industries in terms of, how that's being improved. And, using big data there, I mean, the medical industry, collects, data from patients. And, using that at global scale, you could see patterns of how efficient hospitals might be, of how efficient specific vaccines are being applied to the general public. So I'm excited that if used wisely, it could be greatly beneficial.
At the moment when you know there's a project coming, how are you preparing yourself for it? And how would you be able to figure out the best way to present a set of big data? I understand the ways could be one different from the other.
Well, yeah, I mean, with Earth Time Lapse, like I said, a number of years in the making. It started off as just looking at simple fixed imagery, over just taken one at a time, and then we realized that we could apply this to a global scale. And so you got to start small with these things. You can't just go straight and say, okay, I'm going to look at all billion points at once. So you got to start at a small level, expand outward. And it's worked well for us in that sense.
How much difference do you think you will be able to make with technologies like this, with analysis and presentation of big data like this?
I mean, our hope is to make a large impact. I mean, we've already, at a scale, have handed out these data sets to to different politicians, to different representatives of countries, to see for them to take back and show this data to their governments. And again, like I said, having a global impact is excellent, but also even a local impact. In the neighborhoods, we've worked with data sets, local to my hometown, and
about what?
Well, in Pittsburgh, where I'm from, there's basically a divide of terms of work, in terms of neighborhoods, that are underemployed, and so we've looked at data, why it's been underemployed for that, over the course of the last few decades, and reasons, of. Often the case is there's transportation problems. There's no good public transportation in those areas to get the individuals to potential jobs. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, looking at that at a local scale, we've taken the data and helped improve the regions there. Mm.
But when you are deciding on a certain project, it seems that you're already presumptively come up with the problems probably that's related to certain issues. How can you be fair? I mean, you could also concentrate your efforts of presenting the big data in other areas. So maybe other areas could also be problematic. So how would you be fair, and how would you make sure that technology is really helping us to find a good balance of issues?
Well, I mean, you're right. I mean, often when we've, in terms of data we work with, it's been a problem that, we've seen ourselves, or that we, personally want to solve, mm-hmm. Either locally or globally. And to some extent, I mean, you need to be altruistic about that. You can't necessarily, just be selfish in terms of what you're trying to solve. But, in our cases, the problems have, really weren't to benefit us. I mean, they were to benefit the general public. And I think if you approach it with that model, then yes, you can make the better impact. But certainly, people can approach data and use it to make a profit from it, mm-hmm. not necessarily to just take it out and show the general public.
Mm-hmm. When you are showing your works here at the Summer Davos in Tianjin, what have been some of the responses to you?
Oh, I mean, it always ends with people, gasping in terms of, what they're watching. And, a general sense also is either, is this publicly available? Is the question I always get, can I access this myself? Mm. And then, in our case, yes, you can. And the next set of questions is always, how can I add my own data to this? Or also in the sense of, you've wowed me, but, what does this all mean? How, can this actually make a difference? And, the questions to that are, or the answers to that, I mean, are, potentially yes. I mean, yes, this can make a difference if everyone actually sees this and understands that, the world isn't doomed and that, changes can be made.
And final question from me, will there be an issue of privilege? Who knows how to present big data for the future, and who don't know how to present big data for the future? Who can find their counterpart who can do that? or who cannot find their counterpart to do that. Would that make a huge difference in terms of issues to be identified, solutions to be sought?
Yeah, well, to start with, we've certainly worked with groups that have data and they don't know, how to present it in a way that's clear to the public. And is it fair? And there's actually an interesting example in Rondonia with the Aborigines there. So they're very concerned with protecting the indigenous land there. And they've done this, and they've actually used cell phones to keep track of GPS of where the loggers have coming into. And so, certainly they don't have, access to all the amazing, computer technologies that we have, but they, using the cell phones, they've been able to at least make a difference. And in that sense, that I agree that we need to be concerned with, how people can actually, not necessarily about how we present our data, but how can people then obtain that data and get access. Yeah.
Well, really appreciate it, Paul.
Oh, thank you so
much.
Thank you for having me. Absolutely. Yeah. Same to you.
And that's it for today. If you'd like to see more, you can visit our website. Just type World Insight CCTV News into your search engine, or you can check out our YouTube channel if you live overseas. And from me, Zhou Yue, and everyone on the World Insight team, thanks for watching, and tune in again next time for more insights from across China and around the world.